a dispute only in the case when you're using a twig in between, or even are they arguing even when you're going directly from one light to another light? That was the discussion of the Gemara. So the Gemara, Manuel looks like he wants to join in. Okay. So the Gemara brought from the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash, right? Good morning, Emmanuel. We are on Kaf Beis Amabet 22 2, and the article is 22b 2. 22b 2, where the Gemara was trying to prove what is the argument, regarding the law of can you light from one light of a menorah to another light of the menorah in your house, or not really outside. Today is outside, in the times we used to light outside, or even today where we're lighting inside. Can you light from one light to the other light? And we had in the Gemara a argument between Rav and Shmuel. One says you can, one says you can't. And then we had an argument exactly what is the case they're arguing. Are they arguing when it's directly from one light to the other? Or the only lighting when you arguing when there is using a twig in between, meaning when you're not going directly from one light to the other. And the Gemara has explained the issue is respect for a mitzvah or non-respect for the mitzvah, or possibly looking like you're taking away from a mitzvah. Good morning, Simon. Welcome back. Because one opinion, Rav, is that you can't light from one light to the other using a twig because it is a lack of respect for the mitzvah, because the twig that you're using is not mitzvah. If you're using it for the purpose of mitzvah, because you light the twig from one of the lights, and then you light with that twig a second light. So when you lit the twig from the light number one, the twig is not still yet mitzvah, and it's not respectful that you should light a non-mitzvah item from a mitzvah. That is one idea. And the other opinion, and one opinion says yes, one opinion says no. The other opinion says it's not a problem because still you're lighting the twig for the purpose of mitzvah. It's not called disrespecting, even though you're going from a non-mitzvah, the twig, to a mitzvah light, and lighting using the light of the menorah with that twig lighting the twig from the light of the menorah, and then lighting the other light. The other opinion says that everybody agrees that you can't do that using the twig. They're arguing, can you go directly from one light to the other light? And the concern is maybe it looks like you're diminishing the mitzvah, taking oil, drawing out the oil from one light to the other light. And the Gemara brought the story in the Beit HaMikdash, the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash. And the Gemara showed us that they used that western light, that western lamp, right, the Ner Maravi, that was used to light the adjacent light to its right and to its left. So we see you could light from one light of the Mikdash to another light of the Mikdash. And the Gemara was thinking, how did you light from one light to the other light? Most probably you would have to have taken a twig and then light from the Ner Maravi, that western light the twig, and then go take that twig and light the adjacent light. So it would seem that you are allowed to use even a twig in between in order to light a second light. So the Gemara says no proof. That's what the Gemara says that's not a proof from there. It's not a proof to Shmuel's opinion that you could even use a twig in between according to that interpretation of Shmuel. So the Gemara says, Tar Gemara Papa. The Gemara says this point would be kasha. This point at 22b2 and towards the top of the page. Bein l'mandim mishum bazuyei mitzvah. Mitzvah, according to both opinions that say that explain Rav, that you're not allowed to go ahead and use the light from one lamp to the other lamp of a menorah that you have for the Hanukkah. We see from the menorah in the Mikdash that you could. There's no problem even using a twig in between, and certainly but they were allowed to even, from the menorah and the mikdash, we see you could even use a twig. If you use a twig, you can certainly go from one lamp to the other. So the Gemara says, Tar Gemara Papa B'tilot Arukot. Now, see the Gemara, middle of the first column. Papa explained. You know what's going on in the Mikdash, Simon? The Mikdash, they had long wicks, and that long wick of the Ner Maravi of that western wick would light the adjacent wick, and then that adjacent wick would light the next wick. So let's say here's wick. Let's say here's the Ner Maravi. Let's say according to one opinion, the Ner Maravi is the middle lamp. There's three on the right, three on the left, and there's the middle of the menorah, right? You have seven lights. So let's say this middle wick every wick, let's say, would be long in the mikdash. So this middle wick was long enough to reach the wick to its right, and was long enough to reach. Right. So you see, right. So you could extend that wick, and that wick should be able to touch the lamp to light the other light, and then you would move it away. You're not leaving it. It's not like a torch. You're not leaving like Havdalah candle two wicks together. You just extend it, and then it
have to make it perfectly that they were
that it would that they were able to reach, and then you can move it after you light the other one on its right. You go ahead and you extend it to the left, and you can now move that wick. So it comes right. So but it's the actual wick of the mitzvah itself. It's not a twig. And then it would light the wick next to it, and then that wick next to it will light the wick next to it, and so on and so forth. A domino effect. Each wick would light the wick adjacent to it. Being that's the case, so it is. Good morning, Adam. So therefore, it is directly from one lamp of the menorah to the other lamp of the menorah, but not the use of a twig. So therefore, the Gemara says this is not. We don't see a precedent that you use a twig in between. We only see it goes directly from one to the other. So the Gemara says, but that still would be a question on the opinion of Rav that says you can't go even from one lamp directly to the other. The opinion that says that it looks like you're diminishing the mitzvah to kasha. This would be a question on that opinion, because we see that you're allowed to go ahead and go from one lamp to the other. And there was an opinion in the Gemara that says you can't go directly from one lamp to the other. This is kasha. It's a question. It's not a knockout punch. Tiyufta would be a knockout. It's a question. Not all questions means it knocks out. Could be there's an answer. Maybe we have to look a little deeper into it. So my havila. So the Gemara wants to know, what is the maskana? We brought all these. We had a big long discussion about, can I light from one light of the menorah to the other light of the Hanukkah menorah? Can I light using a twig? And we know, even though the Gemara said, the commentaries point out, the Gemara reported that Rabbah, Abaye said that this Rabbah held like Shmuel, that you're allowed to go ahead and light from one light to the other light. So what's the Gemara's question? What's the law? We already have Rabbah who says you could do it. The answer is, it's true that Rabbah held that you can light from one there to the other, but we know the general rule is when there's an argument between Rav and Shmuel, the law follows Rav when it's non-monetary matters. This is not a monetary matter. This is a question of Isurim. Am I allowed to do this? Not allowed to do this. It's not a financial matter. The general rule is when you have an argument between Rav and Shmuel on a non-financial matter, the law follows Rav. So, and Rav says you can't light from one to the other. So now the question is, so in this case, the Gemara wants to know what is the law? Would we accept this as an exception to the rule or not? Or the Gemara can mean in Rav himself, that Rav says you can light from one light to the other. We saw there's two opinions in understanding. That Rav says you can't light from one to the other. We saw there's two opinions in the Gemara. Does that mean only if you're using a twig in between, or even you can't even light directly from one to the other? So the question might have it. What is the law? So the Gemara says. So what does the Gemara say? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna Brei Rabbi Yeshua, Chazina. Now the Gemara is going to introduce a whole new topic, everybody. It's related, but there's a new, very important point here. We look at to answer this question. How do you answer a question with a question, right? Right? That's one of the ways you answer a question. How do you understand? Do you understand what is the main mitzvah of lighting the menorah, of the menorah? Is the main mitzvah the lighting, or the main mitzvah is the placement of the menorah? But where you place it in a place that's publicizing the menorah. What is the key element of the mitzvah? What is the main mitzvah? So yes, you need lighting, but it might not be the most important component. For example, now the question is, let's say Tosfos points out, if let's say a deaf mute lit the menorah, and then you go ahead and you take that light of the deaf mute and you put it into, he lit the menorah, and then you place the menorah afterwards in the right or he lit the menorah, and and it's placed in the right place. Would that be a kosher? Uh, would that be kosher or not be kosher? Now, or let's say a deaf mute let's say you lit the menorah, but the deaf mute placed the menorah in the appropriate place. So, for example, let's say if let's say you have a if the lighting is the mitzvah, right, and a deaf mute lit the menorah, so a deaf mute is not obligated in the mitzvah menorah because a deaf mute has no dot. He doesn't have knowledge. That's a general historically. People who are deaf and they couldn't speak are considered
They can't express.
they can't express, they don't have understanding, proper understanding, and they're like ishoter, like someone who's, let's say, chas v'sholem retarded, he's not obligated in mitzvah. So if a person who has knowledge went ahead, um, so sorry, so if let's say if deaf mute lit the menorah, and then the person who is who has knowledge went ahead and put that menorah out. He brought that menorah outside. So if the law is that the main thing is the lighting of the menorah, so the lighting was done by someone who was not obligated, and therefore you will not fulfill the obligation. But if the mitzvah is accomplished by the placing of the menorah, so the one who placed the menorah was a person with knowledge, and then he would get credit for the mitzvah. So that's the Gemara's question. The Gemara says the Gemara has he Amar Rav Huna Brei Bishur Chazina had lakaos mitzvah is the main part, is the most important primary part of the mitzvah, the lighting itself. Or is it what? Or is it the hanacha? Hanacha also mitzvah. So the Gemara says, hadlak also mitzvah. If the primary thing is the lighting, then madlikim in nerlene, then you could light from one lamp to the other. Why? Because he's going to say if the primary mitzvah is the lighting, so in the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash, the primary mitzvah was the lighting over there. So being that over there, the primary lighting was the primary mitzvah, was the lighting, Bahalotcha et hanero, which is when you light the menorah of the Mikdash, so too, and just like the Mikdash, they were able to light one, we saw that they lit from one to the other, right? That Ner Maravi, that western light lit the other light. So too, the menorah of the house or outside the house would be similar to that menorah, and you can light from one to the other. But if you hold hanachos and mitzvah, if you hold the key element is not the lighting of the menorah by your house, the key element is the placing of the menorah. So therefore, you would not be able to go ahead and light from one to the other. You would not be malikin minel. Then you can't light. Why, if the placement is, you can't light? If the placement is the main mitzvah, right? I mean, if the placement is the main mitzvah, it would come out that if a deaf mute lit the menorah and then you put it outside, you would get credit because you did the placement. What's the idea? So the idea is, some explain the following. If the most important component is not the lighting, but the placement, so the lighting, in a certain sense, is you went ahead and you took the light of the menorah, light number one, and then you took light number two, and let's say that light number one let's say the menorah is, and you go ahead and you light light number two from light number one, but lighting number two is not really the main part of the mitzvah. It's really the placing is the main part of the mitzvah. So if you're taking, so therefore it's not appropriate for you to go ahead and do something. So you're like doing a different type of activity. You're not doing the main mitzvah by going ahead and lighting from the light of the menorah, because that actual act of the lighting of the second light is not the main mitzvah. So if you hold the lighting is the main mitzvah, so therefore the lighting, so therefore you can take from light number one to light number two, because it's like you're doing mitzvah, just like the menorah in the mikdash was the mitzvah was the lighting. So the main mitzvah was lighting. So therefore you can in the menorah they lit from one light to the other light, and also you can light from one light to the other light. If the main mitzvah is not the lighting but the placement, so the lighting itself is not considered the key element, so to speak. So therefore, you're doing something else. Therefore, 20 miles by lighting number two from the menorah, you are in essence. And where is the menorah? The menorah is already placed down. That's when you're lighting it. The light number two from light number one, it's already placed down. Therefore, you're doing an act which is not considered the main mitzvah act. So in a certain sense, it's a lower act. It's not like mitzvah to mitzvah, because it's not the main mitzvah. Therefore, it would be inappropriate for you to go ahead and light the second light from the first light if the lighting is not the main mitzvah. The boilu, but the Gemara had a question. Halakha osa mitzvah, no osa mitzvah. Just to bring Miles into the Gemara. The Gemara has the question, Miles, what is the main part of the menorah? Is the main mitzvah the actual lighting? Will we call the lighting the 95% of the mitzvah, if we call it like that, or the key element of the mitzvah, or whatever, 80%, whatever you want to call it? Is it we call the 51%? Is that the main part of the mitzvah? That's or is the main part of the mitzvah the placing of the menorah? The placing in a place, the public placing. And the Gemara now is, and the Gemara wants to say that our question of whether you can light, is that clear, Adam, from one light to the other, is dependent on how you understand the Hanukkah menorah. Is the lighting the key element, or the what, the place? If the lighting is the key element, then you could go ahead. It's just like the menorah. Then it'll be like the mikdash. The menorah of the mikdash, the lighting with the key element. And in the mikdash, you could light from one light to the other. So too, here also you could go from one light of the menorah to the other. Or if the key element is the placement, so the placement that you can't go ahead and light. So the lighting aspect is not the key element. It wouldn't be appropriate for you to light the second light from the first light of the menorah. So the Gemara says Tashma. The Amar Rava. Rava says the following. Tashma means we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring up a proof from a precedent that was stated to answer our question. The Amar Rava. Hayatafus. But here, usually Tashma a brighter, but here it's from a statement of Rava. The Amar Rava said, Hayatafus ner Chanukah v'omed. A guy was standing with his Hanukkah menorah. Imagine he's outside his house, and he has his Hanukkah menorah. He didn't place the menorah down, but he's standing holding the menorah. So there's no placement of the menorah.
But it's lit.
But it's lit. Right. And then eventually it went out, but it lasted the proper amount of time. Loss of a klum. He did not get credit for the mitzvah. Why? So the Gemara is thinking, Shema Mina, Hanach Osim Mitzvah. The main thing is the placement of the menorah. And if you did not put it down, you don't get credit for the mitzvah. It has to be put down. And why do you why don't why it was lit? The answer is the Gemara thinking the placement is the key. And therefore, if the placement is the key, therefore you will not be able to light. The lighting is not the key, so therefore you will not be able to light number 2 from light number 1. So the Gemara says, no proof. Really, maybe the placement is not the key. So why, if you're holding the menorah, you don't get credit? When you hold the menorah, it looks like the menorah is not a mitzvah menorah. It looks like it's your flashlight if you're holding it the whole time. It looks like you're using it for personal use. And the menorah has to be there to publicize a miracle. But if it's looking for, if it has the appearance that it's for personal use, you don't get credit for the menorah. So it's no proof the placement is the key. Maybe placement is not the key. There's some other reason why it's not good over there. The onlooker would think that the reason why you are holding it is because you're holding it for yourself, but you want it to serve you. You want its light. Therefore, it's not recognizable that it's a menorah of mitzvah. I don't know if I wished everyone a chodesh tov. It's chodesh today and tomorrow chodesh tov. So the Gemara says Tashma. I'm going to try to bring a proof from a different statement of Rava. The Amar Rava hidlika bifnim. A guy went ahead. Now we're talking now in the time period when you would light the menorah outside, like the original enactment that they were supposed to light the menorah outside. And we said Tosfot and Rashi have two different opinions. Where outside are you supposed to place the menorah? Rashi says it's right outside your door, right outside your house, the door away of your house. You're walking into the house, you have the mezuzah on the right walking in, and the menorah on the left when you're walking in, right outside the house. And Tosfos learns that if you have a courtyard in front of the house, and the courtyard leads into the public property, it's the entrance way of your courtyard. That's where so it's closer to the public domain, which would be much easier for the people in the street to see your menorah if your menorah is right all the way by the entrance way of the street. Entranceway of your courtyard, which is right by the street. So the Gemara says, Tashma, the Amar Rava, if you lit the menorah inside your house, and then and then you brought it outside your house, and you put it on the entranceway, right? So if you did that, lo asaklum, you do not get credit for the menorah, even though you placed it in the perfect spot. Why don't you get credit for the what? For the menorah? Right? Why don't you get credit for the menorah? Because the lighting took place not in the right place. Because you're supposed to light it outside, and you lit it what? Inside. So we see that the main essence of the mitzvah is the lighting. There's the essence of the mitzvah is the placement. So you placed it right. You placed it outside. You didn't place it inside. You placed it outside. But since the lighting is the key element, and the lighting was done outside, you don't get credit. So that's what the Gemara is saying. That's what the Gemara is suggesting. If you say had lakos mitzvah, if you say that the main thing is the lighting, had lakam, therefore you have to light it in its proper place. And if you lit it inside, you don't you don't get credit for the mitzvah. But if you say hanachos mitzvah, the main thing is the placement. Why don't you get credit for the mitzvah when you lit it inside and you brought it outside? You placed it in the right place. So the Gemara says, Hatam Nami, Roa Omer, Laka. The on-seer, if he sees you lit it inside, then he sees you bring the menorah outside. So it looks like it's using it as your flashlight. You already lit it inside. If you lit it outside, so it's clear. Why are you lighting it outside? You're lighting outside for the mitzvah of, that's the mitzvah of menorah. But if you lit it inside, it looks like you bought your flashlight outside with you because you lit it inside the house. Because the inside the house is not the place of where you publicize the miracle.
Right.
Yes.
The fall is more so you can't walk with the menorah.
I'm saying we're saying the Gemara is saying like this. Perhaps the fact that we say that you lit it inside and you brought the menorah outside, you don't get credit. Why don't you get credit? Meaning, so the Gemara wants to suggest now it's possible that really you should get credit,
Right.
because the main thing is the placement, and really you placed it right. You placed it outside. But the only reason why you don't get credit is not because inherently you did something wrong. Not because inherently that because it was lit inside. That's not, and lighting inside is, you mean the mitzvah is the main mitzvah is the lighting and you were done in the wrong place. That's not the reason. The reason is because it's the projection.
Well,
When you walk with it from inside to outside, it looks like that the menorah was not, even though it was for the purpose of menorah, but it doesn't look like that. And therefore, because it doesn't look like that, even though the placement was done right, but there's some side issue of the way it looked. It's looked probably, doesn't look right. It doesn't look like a menorah. It doesn't look like you did it for the purpose of menorah, and maybe that's why you don't get credit. Not that you don't get, meaning there's two possibilities why when you light it inside and you brought it outside, it's no good. Is it because the main mitzvah is the lighting and you lit it in the wrong place? And that's one possibility. That's what the Gemara was thinking. That's what they want to use this as a support, that the main thing is the lighting. Well, now the Gemara is saying, no, it's not a proof. It could be it's from a different angle why it's not good when you let it inside and you outside. Not because the lighting is the key element and it was done in the wrong place. Rather, maybe the lighting is not a key element, but the reason why you don't get credit is because there's some side issue that's taking place here. What's the side issue? That the people will think that this was lit, it's not for menorah purposes. That you lit it for your own personal use. But when we don't have that concern, let's say if the deaf mute lit it, let's say it's outside and the deaf mute lit it, and then you placed it in the right place, so maybe it would be good. That's what the Gemara is suggesting, meaning we don't have a proof that the deaf mute lights it, it's invalid. Because the Gemara said, what happens if a the deaf mute is not obligated in mitzvot. The Torah did not obligate a deaf mute in mitzvot. The Torah did not obligate a shoter, who's a retarded person, in mitzvot. So the question is, if a retarded person lights the menorah, and then the owner of the house places the menorah in the right place, meaning, let's say let's say the deaf mute lights the menorah outside. Let's say, and then the owner of the house places the menorah, picks up the menorah after, let's say, the deaf mute lit it, and he puts it down in the right spot. Would the owner of the house be able to fill his mitzvah? So you're saying no, because you're saying, but let's say it was done outside, where it's the Hanukkah menorah, so where it's not the more personal use. So therefore, if you say that the main mitzvah is the placement, then you would be able to use that menorah that the deaf mute lit. If you say the main law is the lighting, which is going to be the halacha, then the deaf mute's lighting is no good, because he's not a man of what? Of obligation. That's what the Gemara says. So now, Toshma. Now we're on the bottom of the page. The Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, we're now on the next page, 23a. Ashashid shahoita daleket v'alechet kol yom kulo. You had a glass casing where you kept the light of the menorah, and you did such a good, which most people that's how they light outside. They place the menorah in a glass within a glass. But this glass casing of the menorah, you got that, Simon, at 23A1, top line. You lit it Friday afternoon. You lit it for the purpose of Hanukkah, right? So you had to go ahead. What's the law? The law is Friday before Shabbat. You light the menorah. You light it with enough oil that it should last a half hour into the night. And therefore, you can't use the regular standard candles that you use every night for menorah. You can't use those candles for Friday night for menorah, because those candles last maybe a half hour, 40 minutes, whatever. So that those candles would work when you're lighting it generally when it's dark, and then it lasts another half hour. But being that you're lighting the candles of Hanukkah, not when it's on Friday before sunset, you have to light it before sunset. You light it before candle lighting, right? First you light the menorah, and then the lady, the mom, the lady or whoever's lighting the candles for Shabbat lights the candles for Shabbat. Now you have the whole twilight. It has to last the whole twilight. It has to last from sunset until a half hour after dark. So you need a larger amount of oil, or you have to have the special larger candles for Friday night of Hanukkah. But this guy obviously did a nice oil lantern. I mean, Rashi says, because you're talking about it's in a glass. It's a wick in a glass with oil. Rashi uses a French word. Look at the top line of Rashi. Ashashit, kli gadal, a large utensil shazachuchit of glass. Belaz lantarana. Sounds like a lantern to me. And you used a nice lantern, and there was enough oil, and it lasted from Friday afternoon to Saturday night. Not bad, right? Got a nice light on the deal. Usually what? It's entire Shabbat, and now the light of the menorah is still on. But what do? Now it comes Saturday night. You can't fulfill your obligation Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat, of the menorah which was what was lit the day before. You need a new lighting, right? You need to light again Saturday night. See, what do? You extinguish the fire, you take out the fire, and then you relight it again. Then you relight, then you go ahead and extinguish the fire, then you say your brachot, right? The first night of Hanukkah, you say 3 brachot. Hadik ner Chanukah, Shasanis, that's the way the Sfardim say, Hadik ner Chanukah. Ashkenaz say Hadik ner shel Chanukah. Then you Shasanisim and Shechiyonu the first night. The other night, you say 2 brachot. Meaning every night you got to say the bracha, you command us to light the light of Hanukkah. Because I'm lighting, every night you're lighting. And also every night you say the bracha, Shal Sanisam Lavotenu B'Yom Ha'Bazman Azeh. So you're going to go ahead and then you're going to say those, you're going to relight it and say those 2 brachot. First you say the brachot, then you always light. The general is you do the blessings before the mitzvah. People sometimes you see them saying the brachot and lighting, that's a mistake. There's no simultaneously saying the blessings and lighting at the same time. First, you go ahead and what? Say the blessings, and after you say the blessings, then you go ahead and you light. We'll continue tomorrow. Thank you all for joining. Have a great day, Asaf. All the best. Chodesh Tov to everybody. We have to figure out how to remember not to forget to say Ya'aleh V'Yavo in the what? In the Amidah. So I sometimes put a piece of napkin or tissue or something, I put my finger on the place. Whatever you got to do, right? That's